Harlem, New York, 1932. As the Great Depression tightens its grip on the United States, unemployment soaring past 25%, families lining up for bread, entire neighborhoods collapsing into poverty, a photograph begins circulating through New York newsrooms that seems almost obscene in its contrast. While millions struggle simply to survive, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson is captured sitting calmly inside Harlem's most expensive French restaurant, Chez Maurice, on Lenox Avenue, casually spending $50 on a single lunch. On his hand gleams a diamond ring worth $20,000, an amount so extreme it rivals the lifetime earnings of most American workers. The image is jarring not because Johnson is dining, but because he does so openly, confidently, without fear. The New York Herald reports that Johnson maintains a permanently reserved corner table at Chez Maurice, a place where a single meal costs more than a working family earns in an entire week. Harlem's elite, both criminal and legitimate, gather there not merely to eat, but to witness something extraordinary, a parallel economy flourishing in plain sight while the rest of the nation collapses. Yet the true significance of the photograph is not the luxury itself. It is what that luxury represents. Federal Treasury investigators estimate that at just 27 years old, Bumpy Johnson controls assets worth approximately $8 million, an astronomical sum in 1932, equivalent to roughly $150 to $160 million today. Even more shocking is the speed at which this fortune was built. In only 7 years, Johnson transformed himself from an unknown numbers runner earning $15 a week into the undisputed king of Harlem's criminal underworld, personally generating millions in annual income during the worst economic crisis in American history. This is not merely a story of wealth. It is a story of velocity, of how quickly power can be accumulated when laws collapse, corruption flourishes, and violence becomes a business strategy. While legitimate businesses fail and honest workers fall into ruin, Johnson's empire grows at a rate the legal economy cannot match. And as the Herald's investigation begins to reveal, the photographs are only the surface. Beneath them lies a carefully engineered system of intimidation, political protection, and ruthless efficiency that allowed one man to thrive while an entire nation starved. The wealth revealed in the Herald's investigation is not hidden in offshore accounts or locked away in distant banks. Bumpy Johnson's fortune is deliberately visible, engineered to be seen, recognized, and feared. His most striking symbol of power rolls through Harlem's streets in plain sight, a 1931 Duesenberg Model J, the most expensive and luxurious automobile manufactured in America. Custom ordered directly from Indianapolis, the car cost Johnson $25,000 more than most Americans will earn in 20 years of labor, and more than the price of a substantial house during the Depression. Finished in deep burgundy paint, with hand-stitched leather interior, chrome accents, and bulletproof glass installed at additional cost, the Duesenberg is more than transportation. It is an announcement. When Johnson arrives anywhere in Harlem, his presence is known instantly. The car functions as a moving declaration of wealth so extreme that even legitimate millionaires hesitate to own one. And this is only one vehicle. Johnson owns 4 others, including a 1932 Cadillac V16 armored with reinforced steel panels, an $8,000 machine reserved for moments when security outweighs style, and a Packard 12 used for routine errands. His total investment in automobiles alone reaches $43,000, enough to purchase 40 average homes or support a working-class family for 3 decades. Jewelry becomes the next layer of spectacle. Investigators estimate Johnson's personal jewelry collection at $75,000 to $80,000, wealth worn openly on his body. The diamond ring, seen in the Herald photographs, a 3.5-carat stone set in platinum, cost $20,000 by itself. It represents more money than most Americans will accumulate in a lifetime. But it is not unique. Johnson owns at least 8 additional diamond rings, 4 platinum pocket watches, a diamond-encrusted wristwatch purchased from Cartier for $8,000, multiple sets of diamond cufflinks, and countless platinum accessories. None of these items serve a practical function. Their purpose is symbolic, to communicate that spending $20,000 on a single object is inconsequential to him. His clothing follows the same logic. Johnson employs Harlem's most prestigious tailor, paying $400 to $500 per custom suit at a time when ordinary suits sell for a few dollars. Witnesses report that he owns more than 100 suits, never wearing the same one twice in a single month, treating garments as disposable expressions of dominance rather than possessions to be preserved. His wardrobe suits, silk shirts, custom shoes, hats, gloves, and ties represents tens of thousands of dollars more, maintained by a full-time valet whose sole responsibility is to ensure Johnson always appears immaculate. Even personal grooming becomes a luxury. A private barber visits his residence 3 times a week at $25 per visit, costing Johnson over $3,600 a year, more than many families earn in 3 years. In an era defined by scarcity, Johnson's lifestyle is not merely extravagant, it is confrontational. Every car, every ring, every perfectly tailored suit is a reminder that while America collapses, his empire expands unchecked. And yet, these displays are not vanity alone, they are tools. In Harlem, wealth is power, and power must be visible to remain unquestioned. Johnson understands this instinctively. His fortune is designed not just to be enjoyed, but to intimidate, projecting the image of a man so untouchable, so abundantly resourced, that challenging him appears futile before a word is ever spoken. If Bumpy Johnson's cars and jewelry were designed to dominate the streets, his home was built to control territory. In 1931, Johnson purchased a 4-story brownstone at 409 Edgecombe Avenue on Sugar Hill, Harlem's most prestigious and strategically valuable address. The purchase price alone stunned the real estate market. Johnson paid $85,000 for the property at a time when comparable brownstones sold for $30,000 to $40,000. The inflated price was not extravagance, it was intent. Sugar Hill offered elevation, visibility, and prestige, 3 things Johnson needed to cement his authority. But the purchase was only the beginning. Almost immediately, Johnson poured an additional $75,000 into renovations, transforming the brownstone into a fortified command center. Steel-reinforced doors and bulletproof windows were installed at a cost of $15,000. A hidden safe room accessible through a movable bookshelf was constructed for $8,000 more. Custom furniture imported from Europe filled the rooms, alongside Persian rugs, artwork, and decorative pieces totaling nearly $40,000. Advanced lighting systems and security modifications completed the transformation. This was no longer a residence. It was a fortress designed for survival, secrecy, and control. The house operated like a private institution. Johnson employed a full-time staff of 5, a cook, a housekeeper, a driver, a valet, and a 24-hour security guard. The annual payroll alone exceeded $11,900, more than the combined income of 10 working-class families. Monthly operating expenses, utilities, premium food, maintenance, and miscellaneous costs surpassed $2,000, adding another $24,000 annually just to sustain the lifestyle. Even the wine cellar reflected his excess. Johnson maintained an illegal collection of French wines valued at $15,000, stored carefully behind reinforced walls, while millions of Americans struggled to afford basic meals. Yet the brownstone's importance went far beyond comfort. It served as a nerve center. Business meetings were held behind secured doors. Policy operations were coordinated from rooms designed to resist raids. Rivals understood what the building represented: permanence. Johnson was no longer a transient criminal. He was entrenched, invested, and prepared to defend his position with force. Living openly in Sugar Hill sent a message not only to competitors, but to politicians and police that he belonged among Harlem's elite, whether they approved or not. In an America defined by displacement and loss, Johnson's home stood as a monument to stability achieved through power. It was the physical embodiment of his transformation from a boy raised in grinding poverty to a man who could buy safety, silence, and status in the most exclusive neighborhood Harlem had to offer. And inside those reinforced walls, Johnson was not merely enjoying wealth, he was planning expansion. Bumpy Johnson's rise cannot be understood without first confronting where he began. He was born in 1,905 inches, Charleston, South Carolina, into a level of poverty that left little room for illusion. His father worked as a dock laborer, earning perhaps $8 to $10 a week. His mother found work as a domestic servant, bringing home $5 or $6 more. Together, their income barely sustained the family. They lived without indoor plumbing, wore clothes until they fell apart, and experienced the grinding deprivation that defined life for most black families in the Jim Crow South. In 1919, like thousands of others fleeing Southern racial violence and economic stagnation, the Johnson family migrated north to Harlem, believing opportunity waited there. What they found instead was a different version of the same struggle. Rent was higher, food was more expensive, jobs were scarce. Bumpy's father found work as a porter earning $12 a week. His mother cleaned houses for $8. Even with both parents working, survival remained precarious. The North offered fewer whippings and lynch mobs, but it did not offer prosperity. By his mid-teens, Bumpy Johnson had already grasped a truth that shaped the rest of his life. Legitimate work available to black men in 1,920 seconds, America led only to subsistence, never to wealth. No matter how hard one worked, advancement was capped. The future promised decades of labor punctuated by occasional relief, not escape. School became irregular. Odd jobs filled the gaps. And slowly, inevitably, Johnson began looking elsewhere. That turning point came in 1925, when Johnson entered the world of policy gambling under Stephanie Street, Claire, Harlem's legendary Queen of Numbers. By 1926, at just 21 years old, Johnson was earning $200 per week as her chief enforcer and protector, more than his father had ever earned in a month. But the money was not the most valuable thing Street Claire gave him. She gave him education. Johnson learned the mathematics of gambling, how millions of small bets guaranteed profits, how payouts were calculated, how cash flowed through an illegal economy. He learned politics, how Street Claire paid police captains $500 to $1,000 per month, funded Tammany Hall allies, and relied on judges who dismissed cases on command. Most importantly, he learned discipline in violence. Violence, Street Claire taught, was not emotional. It was strategic. It existed to remove obstacles, deter rivals, and protect profits, never to attract attention. He also learned something more subtle: the importance of community loyalty. Street Claire employed hundreds of Harlem residents, donated to churches, supported charities, and framed herself not as an exploiter but as a provider of opportunity. That loyalty, Johnson observed, was often more powerful than guns. By 1928, Johnson was earning roughly $15,000 a year, an extraordinary sum for a young man from nothing, but still only a fraction of what he would later command. What mattered more was that he now understood scale. Employment, even well-paid criminal employment, had limits. Ownership did not. And somewhere between Harlem's policy banks and the lessons absorbed at Street Claire's side, Bumpy Johnson made a quiet decision. He would never work for someone else again. In late 1928, Bumpy Johnson vanished from Harlem. For nearly 16 months, he was gone, no appearances, no public sightings, no confirmed records of where he went or what he did. When he left, he was a well-paid lieutenant under Stephanie Street, Claire. When he returned in early 1930, he was something else entirely. He had money, he had connections, and he carried knowledge that would soon make him unstoppable. Investigators estimate that Johnson came back with $75,000 to $100,000 in cash, a sum he could not have accumulated through his previous position. The source of that money has never been definitively established. Some speculate he was involved in high-level criminal activity outside New York. Others believe powerful figures invested in him, seeing his potential as a future operator. What is certain is that the capital existed and it was deployed immediately. Johnson returned with new relationships beyond Harlem. He now had ties to criminals in Chicago, Detroit, and other major cities, connections that allowed him to operate on a national scale rather than as a local player. He also returned with structural understanding how white and black criminal networks interacted, how power was negotiated across racial lines, and how alliances could neutralize disadvantages that money alone could not overcome. This knowledge would later prove critical when Harlem became a battleground. Between January and December of 1930, Johnson moved with precision. He purchased 6 policy banks from smaller operators crushed by the early Depression, investing roughly $40,000 to acquire operations, generating an estimated $200,000 annually in gross profits. He recruited enforcers and collectors away from rivals by offering higher pay, building an organization of approximately 30 loyal employees. He acquired his first real estate, 3 apartment buildings, for a combined $60,000, providing both income and secure locations for gambling operations beyond the reach of hostile landlords. Equally important, Johnson established his own political protection. He began making payments to police and local politicians independent of Street, Claire's network, ensuring that his growing enterprise would not collapse if old alliances shifted. By the end of 1930, Johnson controlled approximately 15% of Harlem's policy business, generating $150,000 to $200,000 annually and positioning himself for explosive expansion. But what distinguished this phase was intent. Johnson was no longer improvising. Every purchase, every hire, every bribe served a single objective: dominance. He was building not just a business, but an infrastructure, financial, political, and violent, that could withstand war. Harlem was entering a period of consolidation, and Johnson was preparing to decide who would survive it. By 1931, Harlem was no longer an open marketplace. It was a battlefield. The Great Depression was destroying small policy operators who lacked the cash reserves to survive fluctuations in payouts. Bumpy Johnson exploited this weakness with surgical precision. Operators whose businesses were valued at $50,000 to $75,000 were bought out for $20,000 to $30,000, forced to choose between immediate survival or complete annihilation. Johnson's advantage was liquidity. While others collapsed, he paid cash, and cash dictated terms. Those who refused to sell discovered that resistance carried consequences. Policy banks were robbed. Collectors were beaten in public. Families received threats that left little room for misinterpretation. Johnson's violence was not random or impulsive. It was controlled, deliberate, and unmistakably purposeful. His reputation alone was often enough to end negotiations before they began. Between January and September of 1931, at least 8 rival policy operators who continued to resist Johnson's expansion were killed. Some were shot on the street. Others were murdered in their homes. Each killing was a message, carefully delivered and widely understood. Not a single one led to prosecution. Witnesses refused to testify. Police investigations stalled. Political protection ensured that even when suspicion pointed directly at Johnson, charges never followed. At the same time, Johnson expanded horizontally. He instituted systematic protection rackets, collecting $10 to $25 per week from grocery stores, barber shops, and restaurants across his territory. In return, businesses were spared vandalism and theft, and many became unofficial collection points for policy bets. This network generated an additional $75,000 to $100,000 annually while embedding Johnson's operation into the everyday economy of Harlem. Real estate became his long-term anchor. In 1931 alone, Johnson purchased 15 additional properties, investing approximately $500,000 into apartment buildings, commercial spaces, and vacant lots. These assets provided rental income and future appreciation, ensuring that his wealth would survive even if gambling operations were disrupted. By the end of the year, Johnson controlled approximately 35% of Harlem's policy business, earning between $1.5 to $2 million annually. His net worth surged to $3 to $4 million in just 12 months. This was the year everything changed. Johnson purchased the Sugar Hill brownstone, the $25,000 Duesenberg, and the $20,000 diamond ring that became his signature. He dined openly at Chez Maurice, spending $50 a meal without hesitation. Harlem understood the message. Power had consolidated, and it now had a single center. Bumpy Johnson was no longer rising. He had arrived. And with his empire firmly established, he now faced the greatest threat of his life, one that would determine whether his reign would endure or collapse entirely. In 1932, Bumpy Johnson's empire faced an existential threat. Dutch Schultz, one of the most powerful gangsters in America, turned his attention toward Harlem's policy business. Schultz possessed resources that dwarfed Johnson's 10 times the money, larger crews, and a reputation built on relentless economic warfare. His strategy was simple and brutal. Flood Harlem with capital, undercut prices, kill Johnson's enforcers, and bleed the operation dry until collapse became inevitable. Men loyal to Johnson began dying. Policy banks were destroyed. Schultz's presence signaled a level of danger Harlem had not experienced before. But Johnson did not retreat. Instead, he fought back with a combination of speed, local intelligence, and something Schultz lacked: community support. Schultz was seen as an outsider, a predator extracting wealth. Johnson, despite his brutality, was viewed as Harlem's own. Businesses, residents, and informal networks fed him information, shelter, and silence. Johnson's response was calculated. Schultz's enforcers were killed faster than they could be replaced. His operations were disrupted through targeted violence and strategic resistance. And behind the scenes, Johnson's mysterious relationships formed during his unexplained absence years earlier appear to have provided intelligence and resources that allowed him to survive a war he should have lost. By September 1932, Schultz withdrew from Harlem. The attempt to take over had failed. The victory transformed Johnson's position overnight. He emerged controlling approximately 60% of Harlem's policy business, his most dangerous rival neutralized. His reputation spread across New York's criminal underworld, a man who could not be intimidated, destroyed, or bought out, even in a world dominated by white gangsters with vastly superior resources. By October 1932, Johnson's annual income had reached $4 to $5 million, and his net worth stood at $8 million. Yet the significance of Bumpy Johnson's fortune goes far beyond crime. It exposes uncomfortable truths about America in 1932. His rise was not born of moral failure, but rational calculation. Legitimate work offered Black Americans no path to wealth, only survival. Prohibition and anti-gambling laws criminalized activities millions of Americans willingly engaged in, creating profits that dwarfed legal enterprise. Corruption normalized the coexistence of crime and respectability, allowing gangsters to dine openly among society's elites. Johnson's $20,000 ring, his $25,000 car, his $50 meals served no practical purpose. They were symbols of victory over poverty, of defiance against exclusion, and of a system where criminality proved more rewarding than obedience. His story reveals a society where opportunity was denied, laws were selectively enforced, and excess flourished alongside starvation. In the end, Bumpy Johnson's fortune did not represent fulfillment. It represented appetite and endless need to prove ascent through material display, a reminder that even the most extraordinary success, when built on imbalance and exclusion, leaves behind a hollow triumph. And as America struggled to recover from collapse, The photographs from Harlem remained a silent indictment of a nation that allowed such extremes to exist side by side.